Hi, welcome to Physics Solution Manual. Today we are going to learn about dimensions and dimension analysis. So what are they and why are they so important for physics? Well, let's look at dimensions before going into dimension analysis. So dimensions, you must have learned a lot of variations about it. So the one thing that comes to your mind when you say dimension is space. But in physics, the concept goes much more than space. So in physics, dimension denotes the physical nature of the quantity. Right. So dimension analysis is a important tool in physics. We'll get to know that in this video. All right. So, and one more thing that I wanted to clear up is that dimensions are not units. Units and dimensions are totally two different quantities. For example, so let's say you're measuring mass. So mass, you can measure mass by different variations. For example, if you live in few parts of the world where they use FPK system, which is foot, pound, and pound and second system, where you measure your mass by in terms of pound or ounces, you're going to use a pound system. So for example, you might measure a mass by in terms of pound, or you can measure a mass in terms of kilogram, you can measure a mass in terms of grams. All of them are units. Units are standardized devices. You can say they are standardized devices that you would use to measure a certain quantity. All right, for example, you would measure length in terms, you can measure it in terms of foot, you can measure it in terms of meter, you can measure it in terms of nanometer, etc. So there is not quite, you can measure foot by any means of possible, or somewhere I don't know where you will use this, but this is also a kind of measurement for length, which is it's called furlong, and we will talk about that in the questionnaires. So yes, so these are all the units that measure distance or length, right? So these are units where they are attributed to your length. So the length is the dimension. So the physical nature of the quantity that you're measuring is length. So that is the dimension, not foot, meter, nanometer, or furlong, or in the case of mass, pound, kg, or just gram. So they are not the physical dimension, but they are not the physical quantity that you're measuring. You're measuring with a standardized device. So when I say he's 6 feet, you're going to take a standardized measurement, a scale of 1 feet scale, and you're going to measure that person, and you're going to determine that he is 6 feet tall, or less or more, depends on that person. So anyway, moving on to some, okay, and moving on, we have two different ways of dividing our dimensions. So dimensions can be divided into two different aspects. So you have the primary quantities or the fundamental quantities, and you have the secondary quantities. So primary quantities are basically what you would understand. They are the fundamental quantities of physics. Some of the quantities that you might have come across would be length. You've definitely come across these things, trust me. So length and mass, time. So these are used in mechanics a lot, right? So, and then there are few more. So you have electric current, and you have luminosity, which is the brightness of a particular particular source. Temperature, that's pretty self-explanatory. And then you have amount of substance. So they are all considered to be fundamental units they're fundamental units. Why? Because they have a certain attributes. One thing is they do not depend on anything other than themselves, of course. So they don't depend on anything. So when you take length, you're going to strictly measure length. You're going to take a scale and you're going to measure length. When you measure mass, you're going to take the mass and you're going to measure the weight that it has, or the mass. Weight is a very we'll get to that. Okay, so mass and weight are two different quantities. We'll get to that in a bit. And time. Time, again, you're going to take a clock and then you're going to measure the interval of time. But what about, there are other quantities that do not, you need some help. So those quantities come under the secondary. They are called the secondary quantities, or another term for them is derived quantities. So they're basically, this is R. They're basically derived from other quantities. So they borrow from other quantities. For example, force. Force is a very good example of this. Force is from Newton's law. You should know that force is nothing but mass times acceleration, and there you go. So you have mass, you have acceleration. So acceleration itself is also a derived quantity. So it cannot be, you cannot measure acceleration on its own, right? You have to have certain other quantities to measure acceleration. So that's not one that, you don't have a scale for acceleration, you don't have a scale for force, you don't have a scale for velocity. So think of anything that has scale, that would be your dimension. Think of anything that doesn't have scale, and that would be your secondary quantity. Think of anything that has scale, that would be your fundamental quantities, and think of anything that doesn't have scale or that needs a lot of other input, so that would be your secondary quantity. So having said that, we will go to, oh yeah, some of the other, I can give you much more examples for the secondary quantities. You have electric flux density. If you are interested in the electric current analogy. So, and then you have temperature. So what can we say about temperature? We can say entropy. So we'll get back to those things. So these are all derived quantities, and you can say the derived quantities are combination of, I'm sorry about my cat. Yes, so derived quantities are combination of two or more fundamental quantities. Whereas fundamental quantities stand on their own. So okay, so stick around. Thank you for listening, and for the next video we are going to talk about dimension analysis and how it is a very important tool in physics. Thank you for listening, and this is Physics Solution Manual. Thank you.